The dominance continues. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
They said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Another week, another dominant performance by your beloved Michigan Wolverines. And I know this schedule is soft. Now, it's not quite as soft as maybe you think. According to Sagarin, Michigan's schedule ranks, I think it's 69th in the country right now. So that's right in the middle when you're talking about 134, 135 teams. Again, not great, but, you know, we're not talking it's in the hundreds either. Here's the thing, though, when trying to discern, because I'm a big resume guy. Now, when I put my own rankings together, it's about 60% resume, 40% analytics and eye test, which to me are kind of the same thing. They're doing to these kinds of teams what you should be doing if you're the kind of team that people think can win a national championship. I mean, Michigan is, this is the first time in program history they've had this many 30-point games in a row. So, I mean, we're talking going back to the point-a-minute era under Fielding Yost. We're on the brink of the longest Big Ten winning streak the program has ever had. When you look at the analytics, Michigan ranks number 1 on Sagarin and SP+, despite, and that's schedule adjusted. The level of dominance here, no team has taken a snap inside Michigan's 10-yard line yet. The level of dominance here is what it looks like if you really are a top contender for the national championship. J.J. McCarthy leads the nation in QBR. The offensive line now with Ladarius Henderson ensconced at left tackle and Carson Barnhart back at his more familiar right tackle spot where he plays his best football. That looks to be kind of settled in and now seems to be rounding into shape as one of, again this year, one of the better units in the country. Donovan Edwards still mystified at his start. That's all right. Former 4-star recruit Kalel Mullings has really come on and showed now even not just size, but explosiveness at running back. I could see him being a guy that is a prolific back for Michigan a year from now. And then there are just stars all over the defense. Michigan gets 2 pick-sixes in a game for the first time since 2017. Yes, I don't know how good Nebraska and Minnesota are. I think they're both probably teams fighting for bowl eligibility Thanksgiving weekend at the end of the year. But Michigan's just destroying the spread in these games. Michigan was favored by 18 against Nebraska, won by 38. Favored by 18 again against Minnesota, won by 42. So analytically and according to the eye test, the amount of depth, I mean, PJ Fleck said this was the best football team he's coached against in his 11 years as a college football head coach. The numbers say that. The data says that. And that's why analytics like SP Plus and Sagarin have Michigan ranked number 1. The only thing that holds me back is, again, who you do it against. Now, a lot of the guys on this team did it against Penn State and Ohio State a year ago. But they have the one thing that holds me back a little bit here, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this in the comments section, is I go back to the Bowling Green game. And the one time this year that the team didn't play well and faced some adversity, and two things in that game bothered me. Coming out after halftime, and you go 3 and out when you probably were making adjustments and had a plan, and that obviously didn't work out. And then the way J.J. McCarthy, who's been so good this year, I mean, if you look at J.J.'s QBR, it's fascinating. It's here. Then Bowling Green, it's down here. He had a 10 QBR, and then it's up here for the rest of the games. He literally has an over 90 QBR in 5 of Michigan's 6 games, and a 10 QBR in the Bowling Green game. You saw him get visibly rattled. And so those are the only two things that why I'm still ranking Michigan in my rankings like around 5th, because there are teams on this schedule that can create some adversity for Michigan. I still think they're the best and deepest team in this league, but I don't think the difference between them and Penn State and Ohio State is so great that if the quarterback gets rattled, halftime adjustments aren't there, they can just go ahead and name a score rather than get beat. And so that's the one thing I'm still wanting to see. And we also haven't had the oblique game yet. There's always those kinds of games. We had one against Maryland last year. That was kind of an oblique game where for a while there it looked like Michigan might actually lose before it came back in the second half. So, Ohio State last year against Northwestern was an oblique kind of a game. These are not robots. These are not algorithms. They're humans. And there's going to be weeks that things are not going well, or a key player's got some problems in the classroom or with a girlfriend, or just isn't feeling right and struggles and makes mistakes. And they are things that defy computers. I mean, one of the best Michigan teams of my lifetime was the 1992 team that went undefeated, had 3 ties. 3 ties, won the Rose Bowl, won the Big Ten, went undefeated, came out against Illinois in the last home game of the year, just a team loaded with pros, and fumbled the ball 7 times. Just inexplicable, completely inexplicable, and ended up having to forge a tie after fumbling the ball 7 times. I mean, stuff happens. These are not, again, formulas or algorithms. They're people. And sometimes it's just not your day. Could be this Saturday. Yeah, I know Indiana's terrible, but Tom Allen's teams have played us tough before. The weather looks like it could be extremely problematic if the current forecast holds up. Might be a lot of precipitation in there. Indiana's, the one unit they have that is good is the defensive front. Gave Ohio State problems, gave Louisville problems there. And so maybe they shut Michigan's running game down. The passing game isn't there given the weather forecast in order to deal with the imbalance. And now suddenly you're in a grinded out game before you know it, and it might be one turnover the other way goes against you. I still want to see that. Now, hey, I mean, you got James Franklin out there today taking veiled shots at Michigan's schedule as his team gets ready to prepare for UMass after it already played Delaware. Get out of here with that bleep. Nevertheless, though, it's the old Mike Tyson line. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Mike Tyson was one of the greatest fighters that there ever were, but he was an absolute front runner. You think of the fights where he lost historically, whether it's Buster Douglas, whether it's Evander Holyfield, it's where those guys prolonged the engagement. And now Mike Tyson's not going to win because he's got that left hook and this thing is over in the first round. He's going to have to actually box all the way through to the end. And I wonder if we're that kind of a team where we can just overload you with brute force. But what happens when you're not overloaded and you can hang around for a while? We've yet to see that. Georgia faced that against South Carolina. You look at other teams that have faced that around the country as well. Texas faced that against Alabama and Oklahoma. Oklahoma faced it against Texas. Florida State faced that against LSU on the road at Clemson. We haven't faced that yet, and we will. And if you know anything about this sport at all, historically, it can often happen at the times you least expect. Steve Deace here, and we get asked a lot, hey, how can we support what you guys are doing at Michigan Podcast? Well, now is a great time to become one of our supporters on Patreon. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast is where you can go. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And if you go there, we're going to make you a little jingle. In fact, you would have gotten these a few months ago, long before the season even started. All of my 2023 football futures bets I've made thus far. I can't recommend a selection any more than I bet this myself. And last year, if you followed my football futures bets and you bet alongside of me, you made a pretty nice ROI chunk of change by the time the season ended. So keep up to date on all things we think and do here at Michigan Podcast, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. But more importantly, just $5 a month. And chances are you're going to make a lot more money than that following our sports betting selections. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Again, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And thanks to all of you that have been supporting us already. We appreciate each and every one of you. Go Blue. Time now for the 10-minute war. And for that, we bring in the voice from the other side of the scarlet and gray septic tank, who also has his own channel here on YouTube. It's outstanding, if you ask me. The voice of college football, Mark Rogers. Good to see you again, my fellow college football nut, and my one and only Bucknut friend. How are you, brother?
I'm doing just fine, Steve. I am the one and only. Okay. Well,
that's a little over the top. Some of my best friends are Bucknuts.
Okay.
Anyway, let's get to it. Halfway through the year, and Michigan is displaying historic levels of dominance. We're talking longer streaks of 30-point consecutive games since Fielding Yost had. We're talking the fewest points allowed to open the first half of a season since Fielding Yost. We're talking number one in both Sagarin and SP+. No offensive opponent has taken a snap inside our 10-yard line. J.J. McCarthy is number one in the nation in QBR. I mean, there's a lot to like here, but I still am a guy that wants to know who you've played. Now, as we get further into the year and we have more data, eye test and analytics, I think, matters more. So it matters more to me now than it did, Labor Day weekend or the second week of the year. But still, there has not been that test yet, which is why I'm only ranking Michigan 5th in my poll when they're second in the major polls right now. So where do you come down on this? Typically, my rankings can be usually about 60% resume, 40% eye test / analytics. But what do you think?
Well, I was going through total offense and total defense. I was going more precisely into the advanced metrics. So the yards per play is a good stat that's pretty simple and basic. And we know what the level of competition has been. So I don't have to go through it. Your listeners probably know, and I know that you know what that the triple digits have typically been next to the opponent's total offensive rankings and yards per play rankings. Minnesota and the like have just not been good football teams. However, I will state it this way, and then I will state it this way in regards to the schedule. On one hand, I believe every team in the country has played a team that is better than the best team Michigan has played. If Michigan's best opponent is Rutgers, Minnesota, and Nebraska, how can you weigh those three? They're all about the same. I started scanning through teams, and I can't think of a team that has not played a better team than Michigan's best opponent. However, if we're looking at the best teams in the country, and there's typically 4 or 5 teams that we can look at and say, these are national championship contenders, maybe that list has grown to 10 or 12 this year at this point. All of those teams have struggled against somebody, and somebody not that good. So
that's a
Michigan
good point.
is the only team to
like
have
Wyoming and Texas were tied 10-10 heading into the fourth quarter, for example. Yeah,
you can go through.
No, I think Wyoming should be in the top 25, but the point still stands. They're a group of 5 team. I hear you. Yeah.
USC has been struggling for a month. Florida State, Boston College, Georgia against some mid to low tier teams in the SEC. Everyone has struggled against someone except Michigan. They have been complete from start to finish. They've been able to pull starters in the third quarter. So even some of their offensive and defensive metrics have to be, the first consideration for me is, well, they haven't played anyone. But then the next consideration has to be, well, they have pulled starters very quickly in these games compared to the teams that we would compare those statistics against. So they've been dominant wins and complete wins. They can only play the schedule. The coaches and players can only play the schedule. I will fault Ward Manuel and the athletic department for pulling the big non-conference game the last 2 years. I would also
go ahead.
Just say, Steve, I would also have a different perspective on this team if they were not the two-time defending Big Ten champion that disposed of Ohio State and Penn State last year. If this was 2021, then I have a much different look at it.
That's an excellent point. And a lot of these players were the same players that did what you just talked about the last 2 years. So that, similar to Georgia, that's part of the calculus there. With Georgia, it's probably more their recruiting rankings because they got a ton of new faces. But yeah, I think that's a smart take. What do you think about James Franklin taking a veiled shot at Michigan's schedule as he got ready to prepare for UMass, do you think? And his last game played Delaware. I mean, is self-awareness, what's deader in America? Self-awareness, disco. No, you're playing UMass, dude, and your last game was Delaware. And this is the hill you're going to die on? I don't.
Yes, because you scheduled West Virginia. That's just
who was preseason picked last in the Big 12. Now, they've ended up being better than people thought, and they should get credit for that win. I'm not here to say, Michigan's schedule, according to Sagarin's, is 69th. I think Penn State's around 40th. They've played the better schedule. Some of that, though, is a conference schedule. They played Illinois at the time that they were, 1-1. And they played Iowa, who's now 5-1. And, Michigan has nothing to do with the conference schedule. It's not, not Michigan's fault that that Nebraska has a new coach and Minnesota has a new quarterback who can't throw the ball across the street.
We can also look at it this way, Steve. What team in the country will play a tougher two opponents in November than Michigan will?
So or three, depending on how you see Maryland sandwiched in there too. But yeah, sure.
Now let's also, when we're looking at coaches' comments, how about this? Forget what James Franklin said. What about what PJ Fleck said after the game?
Oh, that he thought this was the best team he's ever coached against, Michigan was? Yeah.
11 years. And I actually went through, just kind of skimmed through the catalog upstairs to say, okay, who has he played? Well, they've typically played a top 5 team in the country, whether you go back to Western Michigan, taking on a college football playoff team in Michigan State and a number 1 ranked Ohio State team in 2015, all the way through these years. They typically run into somebody every year. The Ohio State team that won the Rose Bowl in 2018, they have run across some really good teams, top 5 teams consistently. So if he truly means that, and he gave some depth to that too, he talked about every position's rock solid, they're aligned, they don't make mistakes. They played 74 players against us, and they all just did their roles, did their jobs. They're big. They're as big, strong, fast as anybody I've seen. So he didn't just throw away that comment. He gave some depth to it.
I think on paper, and from what I've seen from the eye test, it's at least the best Michigan team, or maybe has the potential to be, because we're still only halfway through the year. It has the potential to be the best Michigan team so far this century, I think. So that would put it ahead of 2006. That would put it ahead of last year or the year before or 2003. Those would probably be the top 4 Michigan teams of the 21st century. And now you're getting back, you're back to 1999, where, Michigan's got a team loaded with guys from the 97 class that was number 1 in the country and a quarterback named Tom Brady. Beats Alabama in an Orange Bowl, and the 97 team that won the national championship. So now you're going back to another era of college football too, where you could actually win every week 14-10 if you had to. So things were played differently than it is now. But I do think it is. I mean, they're putting up Alabama, Georgia kind of, or Ohio State kind of numbers against underwhelming competition. I'll say to you what I said before you came on. There's still 2 concerns that I have, and we're nitpicking, man. when you're winning by 30 points every week, and in the grand history of the winningest program of all time, this is a longer streak of 30-plus points than Fielding Yost had. So when we're there, we're nitpicking. But that's, we got to have something to talk about. And I think these might be legit nitpicks. I go back to the Bowling Green game. And yeah, I think there should be an asterisk there. You don't have your head coach. And the guy that is coaching the team is also coaching the offensive line and coordinating the offense. So everybody's got a lot on their plate, okay? But I go back to Michigan played like garbage in that first half. You figure they're coming out like a house of fire in the second half. They get the ball to start the half. They go 3 and out. I'm a little concerned about that. And then you could, if you go back and watch that game, you can visibly see J.J. McCarthy lose his composure. And if you look at his QBR, man, it's 90 plus, 90 plus, 90 plus, 10, 90 plus, 90 plus. I mean, so was that game an outlier? There's going to be moments when you're playing the teams we're playing at the end of the year where you're not going to just Mike Tyson and Michael Spinks people. You're not just going to come out and scare the hell out of them and knock them out in the first round as they're running away from you. They're gonna be able to Buster Douglas you. They're gonna be able to Evander Holyfield you. You're the biggest. You're throwing the biggest punches, but we're not going to be so easy to knock out. And in that case, can Michigan consistently apply the pressure? And I think a lot of these are the guys that faced that in Columbus last year. And so I think the answer is probably yes, but that's the one thing I am concerned about moving forward.
Yeah, from a motivational standpoint, incentive, confidence, take all those intangibles and throw them in to what goes through these athletes' minds and hearts, and then them collectively. I think Michigan's in a great position because they're not a complete unknown. They don't need to prove it to themselves, I don't believe, at this point. They've gone through Ohio State 2 consecutive years. They've won the Big Ten championship. They were on the field with TCU. They know that they blew that game. Credit TCU with being there to receive the gifts, but they know that they blew that game. But there's still the hunger and the incentive and the drive to reach the very tip of the mountaintop. So I think that's a good place to be, where you have the confidence knowing, hey, we know how to win big games against elite teams. We've done it, but we haven't achieved our goals yet. So there's still that hunger and that drive to do so.
You'll get this analogy. Here's the thing where I may be the most confident. I go back to your team that probably won the national championship a year before they were supposed to. And they had like that super sophomore class like Woody Hayes had back in the day. Okay. And Taylor Decker and Ezekiel Elliott and Michael, all these guys are phenomenal, and they kind of all matured at once, and they win the college football playoff in 2014. All those guys, because they're all sophomores, all have to come back for 2015, right? Preseason number 1, I think you were a unanimous number 1, actually. One of the, I think Georgia this year was the first unanimous preseason number 1 in the AP poll since that Ohio State team. And that Ohio State team beat everybody, but had a lot of games where it was sloppy. I think of that game at Indiana as just one example. It was kind of, they kind of knew it was basically a 2 or 3 game year. You had Michigan State and Michigan both at the end of the year, and we're kind of at peak D'Antonio for Michigan State, right? And you face that adversity of the terrible weather. Michigan might face that this weekend with Indiana, by the way. And Indiana's defensive line, you guys saw it. I do think it's legit. I do. It might be the only legit unit on the team, but if you're going to have one legit unit on a team, that's the one to have legit, okay? And Michigan State muddies that game up, finds a way to win, and that Ohio State team doesn't win a national championship. I think about that team with our team a lot, where a lot of these guys came back, and they didn't have to. They just chose to because, they had unfinished business, and, we've got a good NIL program for bringing guys back. The one thing, though, that impresses me, take away Bowling Green in the first half, there hasn't been any sloppiness. In fact, this last game, Mark, it's the first time since 1980 Michigan's played a game and didn't get called for a single penalty. And that Ohio State team in 2015 was so much more talented than every opponent. It was basically playing itself every week. And remember the one game you lost. Like, you're in a driving rainstorm. You've got a first-round pick at tailback. Run him into the ground. And for whatever reason, you're out here chucking and ducking rather than just putting the ball in Ezekiel Elliott's belly. You know this history better than me, right? And Ezekiel Elliott loses his mind in the media the next week against us. Of course, you figure out, let's give the guy the ball and blow us off the field, all right? But we have not seen with this team, because when you are an Ohio State 2015 or a Michigan 2023, you're competing against yourself more than the opponent virtually every week. And so you're looking for precision. You're looking for discipline. I mean, this is the least penalized team in the country, and it's had 4 different head coaches. That's one of those little things that gives me confidence for when we do face that moment that someone can stand in the middle of the ring and punch us back.
So we can't evaluate these athletes looking at the 2015 Ohio State team versus the 2023 Michigan team and evaluate, how seriously they're taking it, how focused they are. That 2015 obviously team wasn't for the most part, but I do think that most of that probably comes from them winning the national championship. So they already had that in their hip pocket.
Yep.
And this was just icing on the cake. And they probably looked at that schedule and thought, we can win all the games, and then we can turn it on late and still win a national championship. I don't think they were mailing. I don't think you go 12-1 and win the Fiesta Bowl and beat Michigan by 4 touchdowns and beat Notre Dame by multiple scores and finish number 3 by completely mailing it in. But I got to think that they were a bit full of themselves and knew how good they were and thought, we can turn it on right at shoot. Michigan State was really their first really good opponent the next to last week of the season, similar to Michigan's schedule this year. They didn't play anyone throughout the season. Virginia Tech really wasn't that good of a non-conference foe. So a little bit different than Michigan still wanting to grab the prize.
Good stuff, my friend. Always good to see you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
You bet. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you who was Michigan's first half MVP. 73% of you said J.J. McCarthy, and that is the correct answer. 18% of you said Roman Wilson, also not a bad answer. 5% of you, or 6% of you, said Mike Sanders, also not a bad answer. And 3% of you said Chris Jenkins. None of these were bad answers. That's why I nominated all 4 of them. That brings us to our feedback of the week. Ryan says Michigan's first half MVP is the schedule. I hope that is so snotty. I hope it's a fan of another team. Respect. That's a tip of the cap there for sufficient levels of snottiness for sure. Respect. I liked it. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, follow, whatever applies, however you watch, like right here on YouTube, or listen, like maybe on iTunes. We would love it if you would help us find more Michigan fans just like you. And I haven't asked for these in a while, too. Leave us 5-star reviews. The algorithms really like those as well. If you love the show, please leave us a 5-star review. And again, help us to find more Michigan fans just like you. And you can also find us on Twitter in between episodes at Michigan Podcast as well. And you can usually find me on game day on Twitter at some point having an emotional, nervous breakdown. So those are always fun, unless you're me. But they're fun for everybody else. All right. We are back at it again next week right here on Michigan Podcast. Until then, I'm Steve Deace. Go Blue.